Hi guys, Buildzoid here, and today we're going to be talking about this lovely rumor that WCCF Tech has decided to start, because that's what they do. They make stuff up, call it an article, and then people believe it. Uh, anyway, well, no, I don't think they made up, let's say, things like this right here and that right there. I think those are totally reasonable. Um, those seem to be like actual leaks. Not that I have any proof of that or anything. Like AMD doesn't seem to know that I exist, so they're not leaking anything through me anytime soon. But this part of this rumor right here is just like, no, just no. That's the part where it's like that's the part I take offense with. So twice as fast as Navi 10. So let's talk about this. So, oops, press the wrong button. Let's talk about this. So Navi 10, what do we know about Navi 10? Well, Navi 10 is, of course, the 5700 XT. It is made on the TSMC 7 nanometer N7 process, so just regular N7, so regular 7 nanometer. It has a total board power of about 220 watts. It has a core power limit of 180 watts. We know it's an 180 watt power limit because it says so right here. If you don't know why I believe this right here, well, like this is literally the software power limit that AMD has in their power play tables. So that's what that is. So 180 watts for the core. So that's cool and all. And then for the board power, I'm just going off of Tech Power Up's power consumption figures. Here you can see average gaming power consumption is around 219 watts. Peak gaming power consumption is about 227, and sustained for a mark is 223. So, you know, I've just kind of rounded that down towards 220, though I guess you could also consider it 225. Anyway, so core power consumption around 180 watts. The V-Core VRM is probably producing about 15 watts of heat. So that leaves us with about 25 watts for everything else. So the rest of the card is about 25 watts. Some of that's going to be the cooling system. Some of that's going to be things like the memory, and most of that's going to be things like the memory controller, memory chips, that kind of thing. So that's where most of that power is going to be going. Navi 10 has a 256-bit memory controller running at 14 gigabits per second. Yeah, that's kind of that. That's all we really need to know. Oh, and it has 10.3 billion transistors. So we'll just put a B for there and TR for transistors. So that's a Navi 10. Now, for comparison, the Navi 21 GPU is going to have faster GDDR6, but we don't know how much faster. But based on the fact that, well, Samsung currently only still lists 16 gigabits as their top speed, I'm going to go with it's probably just going to be 16 gigabits. So anyway, let's start Navi. Actually, I should try fit these next to each other. So can I? Yeah, I can. Okay, so Navi 21. TSMC again for the manufacturer, N7 Plus process this time. And this is where we do get some of the improvements. So we get plus 20% more transistors for the same area. Also, this is a 251 millimeter square die. I almost forgot to mention that. That's where they're getting the twice the performance thing, and about minus 15% power consumption. Oh, also this on average runs on about 1887 megahertz, and I'm just pulling that number again from the Tech Power Up review of the card, of the reference card. Not like custom cards will obviously run faster just because they're not so thermally limited. Where is it? Clock speed. Also, there's going to be some card-to-card variants as well. Like, even if you bought, like, 20 reference cards, because they all have a dynamic boost system, there's actually, like, the average clock speed is not going to be super consistent. But anyway, 1887 over there. So that's kind of that. And yeah, so this is where I'm pulling the plus 20% more transistors from WikiChip. I tried to find something on TSMC's own website. I did find the thing about plus 20% more transistors. The 15% power reduction, it's just impossible to find anything official, but that seems to be, like, most sites seem to be, well, I can't find this on TSMC's own website, but all the other sites reporting about N7 Plus just go with, like, yeah, minus 15% power at the same clock speed. So that's pretty cool. So if we take these two factors, and the die is 505 millimeters square. So the die is very big. So theoretically, in terms of transistors, we're going to be looking at something that has about 24.7 transistors, 24.7 billion transistors, because we have 20% more transistors per millimeter square, and we have about twice as many millimeters. So I literally just took this number and multiplied it by 2.4. So yeah, 24.7 billion transistors. So if the performance per transistor per clock stays the same, we would be looking at maybe like plus 2.4x perf. Right? Assuming that the... I didn't like the plus in front of that, so times 2.4x performance. Assuming that the transistors are still, like that there's no... the thing is, there's going to be ray tracing support on this, so some of those transistors are going to be used for ray tracing, which is new. Obviously, this 10.3 billion includes memory controllers, so we don't need to worry about that. That's going to be factored in here as well. But the per transistor per clock performance doesn't tend to scale linearly with most GPUs. Like, you tend to have, like, the really big GPUs have disproportionately many transistors relative to how much faster they are than some of the other smaller GPUs. So this already is this is very optimistic, and this is probably going to have ray tracing support. So that's going to chew up some of the transistor allowance as well. But the bigger problem here is it's going to pull 2.04 times more power. Yeah. No. Because that's the thing, right? Like, minus 15% power consumption. So if you don't lower the clock speed, assuming you stay at, the same clock speed, 7 megahertz, it's going to pull 2.04 times as much power, which is going to be about 367 watts. Right, 2.04 times 180 for just the core. If you factor in the VRM is going to be another 32 watts on top of that, roughly, assuming that the VRM efficiency stays the same. But that's just like 92% VRM efficiency. That's not a really ridiculous VRM efficiency figure right there. So plus 32 watts for VRM. So that's going to be our core VRM, and again at that 1800 megahertz. And then we need a memory system, and we've not even put any memory on this, right? There's no memory controller, no memory, 400 watt GPU. Right off the bat, this is going to need to get underclocked, like hard, because it's going to pull way too much power. Which means it's going to be great for overclocking, assuming that the memory control, it doesn't get immediately bandwidth limited. So what about the memory situation? So the thing is, the miscellaneous parts of the core, right, are 25 watts. And this is not necessarily correct, but I don't have the necessary measurements to do this any better way. So if we had a 384-bit memory controller, I'm going to guess that it's going to pull about 37.5 watts for the rest of the card. Right, which is not correct, because ideally I'd have a Navi and have measured power scaling on every single rail on the thing, but I don't have a Navi and I don't really want to pay for one. So, actually, I'm just not really interested in testing one anytime soon. I'm just flooded with CPUs to work on, so it's not even pay for one. And I could probably get a sample at this point. It's just that I don't even want to do that. Anyway, but I can't get better data for this, so we'll just go 37.5 watts. There's definitely a way to calculate a really nice figure, but we'll just go 37.5 watts, and 384 bits at 16 gigabits per second is only going to give us plus 71% more memory bandwidth. And from the reading I've done, it seems that Navi 10 is already relatively memory bandwidth limited. So guess what's going to happen if you take your 240% core speed and combine it with 71% more, 140% more core speed, and combine it with 71% more memory speed. You're just going to get horrifically memory bottlenecked, and it's not going to go anywhere. So yeah, this is why AMD was so big on HBM. Is like when they were trying to go past the 290X, they were like, well, you can't really make that memory controller any bigger because it physically won't fit anymore. And that's how the Fury X ended up with HBM. And then it was slow anyway because the core kind of sucked regardless. So yeah, that was great. Anyway, so this right here, not really okay. A 512-bit memory controller, on the other hand, would put us probably around 50 watts of power consumption. The thing is, I'm also I'm assuming that they managed to maintain the same power consumption the same power consumption, even though the memory controller is actually going faster, which tends to increase the power consumption a bit. But the memory chips are different, so they might not pull as much power as some of the, it's higher speed bin memory chips, so I'm assuming they pull the same power, they're not going to pull significantly more power, even though they could. So this could very easily turn from 50 watts to 60 or something. But anyway, here we'd actually get our full plus 100%, actually more than plus 100% memory performance. Oops. I don't have the number for that right now, so we'll just have to whip out the calculator and do 16 times 512 divided by 256 divided by 14. Okay, so that would give us plus 128% memory performance, right? Let me just check. Yeah, plus 128%. So here, so now we have something that's 2.28 times the memory controller of a regular RX 5700 XT. So with this right here, you could actually work with that, kinda. Except for the part where I don't really think this is viable to physically fit onto a GPU. If you've ever seen a 2080 Ti, you'll notice how the whole core is rotated all kind of awkward, basically just to get the GDDR6 and PCIe and everything to fit onto the PCB. I don't really think we're going to see a 512-bit GDDR6 memory system anytime soon, just because unlike with GDDR5, GDDR6 has much more stringent requirements on the trace layout and the trace length. So you can't just if you've seen an R9 290X PCB, the chips are kind of just jammed wherever they would fit because there's so many of them. And then if you look at a 2080 Ti, all of the chips are pretty similar distance to the actual die, and the only space that you're going to have a full surround of memory chips around the GPU core. If you wanted to get any more memory chips onto something like a 2080, if you wanted something that used the same style layout as a 2080 Ti while being 512 bits. So I don't think this is this very well physically won't fit. And this is not fast enough to support this much of a performance increase, which again is assuming that the transistors scale perfectly, which they don't, and also that you didn't underclock the GPU at all. Also, ignoring the fact that there's going to be ray tracing hardware. So the thing is, I think this is a realistic actual memory system for the card. So this right here, actually, I can switch colors. Too big. There. That's what I think of that. This is viable because we've already seen that on a 2080 Ti. This is definitely doable. Well, not at this speed, but it's doable. So a 512-bit memory controller, just too big to be practical. Now, this does mean that, if you have a 300 watt total board power, which you don't want to be shipping a card with more than a 300 watt total board power. That's how you get all the reviewers complaining about your power consumption being too high and your blower heatsink being too noisy. Actually, at 300 watts, they're probably still going to be complaining that the heatsink is too noisy. And I'll agree with them because a 300 watt GPU with a blower on it is too damn noisy. This is not something we need to test anymore. If your card pulls 300 watts and you put a blower on it, it's going to be too loud. Those they can't do those. That style of heatsink is just not fit for that amount of power consumption. there's not enough cross-section to cram all the air you need through the heatsink at a reasonable velocity, like at a reasonable airspeed that's not going to produce a bunch of turbulence and noise. So, yeah. But anyway, so we're just going to say, okay, let's stick to 300 watt total board power consumption. So from that 300 watts, we need to remove 38 watts for the, well, let's do 37 watts for the memory system and everything else on the card. So that's going to leave us with like 263 watts core power. And yeah, the thing is, I don't actually know where that 1887 megahertz lands on the frequency voltage curve of a Navi 10 GPU. And it is true that, small decreases in voltage, small decreases in frequency can translate into equally small decreases in voltage, but massive drops in power consumption. But the thing is just like at the same time, if your memory system is just like this size, this is a major concern, right? Like this right here is a very major concern, unless a very large chunk of those 24.7 billion transistors are dedicated to somehow, reducing the bandwidth requirement of the GPU core, right? Like, and in that case, well, if you dedicate a lot of silicon to reducing how much memory, like how much much memory bandwidth it needs, well, that's silicon not being used to directly increase compute performance, right? So this goes out the window again. And even then, I do believe you'd need to underclock the car. Like, you'd still need to underclock it. So, because it would still pull way too much power, right? Like, it's just gonna, like, this is way too much freaking power. So, I don't believe that the card can be 200% faster. I mean, 100%, like twice as fast. Like, 2x, nope. Like, there's no way it's going to be twice as fast as a Navi 10. Now, 71% faster than a Navi 10? Sure, I'd believe that. There's more than enough transistors to get that big of a performance jump. Also, the other thing is, like, you can actually, like, if you... Because the thing is for 71%, like, how much could you underclock it? If it's at 2.4x... like, you could underclock it a lot and still have, like, a good ratio of memory bandwidth to core speed, is basically what I'm getting at. I'm trying to figure out in my right now, like, how you would do that, the math for that, but I have 2.4 times more transistors, 71% more bandwidth. Oh, wait, I know. You would just do... Oh, yeah, that's easy. So let me pull up a calculator. So you just do 2.4 divide by 1.71, I think. No, it's other way around. There, that's what I wanted. Divide by 2.4 and times... And you could run it at like 1300 megahertz, and you wouldn't hit a memory bandwidth bottleneck. Theoretically. I think that works out. Right? Yeah, I think that works out. So you could, like, if it really does only have, like, this memory configuration, you could underclock the core a lot, and then it would be no problem to hit, like, the 263 watt power consumption. Like, it's really... Because the thing about power consumption in general, like, with semiconductors and, like, CPUs, GPUs, memory, all of that, is you basically have this couple of performance curves. So if you have power versus P versus voltage, and you have P versus frequency, and then you have frequency versus voltage, and the relationships tend to look like something like... So frequency versus voltage, you actually have something that looks like that. Initially, it's relatively straight and linear, and then it rolls over, and then it potentially goes like actually, it's not that uncommon for things to do that, where if you keep raising the voltage past a point, your frequency actually starts going down because it's overheating, but we can ignore that here. But still, you have a curve that looks something like that. And so here you get the really bad efficiency. Here's like where you actually want to be. Well, actually, no. As long as you're increasing voltage, your efficiency is getting worse because the power draw to voltage curve looks like this. And the reason for it is very simple. Basically, like it's approximately P equals V squared. So it's a quadratic relationship. And the reason for it is very simple. If you increase your operating voltage by 10%, your current draw is going to increase by 10%. So your total power consumption increase is 21%. So if you just do it in terms of relative terms, you're going to get a curve like that, where it's quadratic with voltage. So yeah, even if you're in the linear part of the voltage frequency curve where, things are looking good, you increase voltage by, a fixed amount and you get an equal, like proportional amount of frequency increase, you still get a disproportionate increase in power consumption. And power versus frequency looks like this, where it's literally a straight line that's almost 1-to-1. So you basically get something that like P equals F. Normally it's actually you actually gain a little bit of efficiency as you push the frequency closer to the limit of what the voltage can sustain. So it won't necessarily, like, instead of 1-to-1, it tends to be like 1 to 0.9. So for a 1%, like 10% increase in frequency tends to translate into something like a 9% increase in power consumption. But it also depends on the architecture a bit. But in general, that's been like, I've tested this on multiple CPUs and GPUs and that kind of thing. I use this lovely relationship right here. I use that to calculate theoretical power consumptions quite regularly, and I check it against various hardware just for fun, because why the hell not? Just to make sure that it's relatively accurate, and it's not too bad. So yeah, and this tends to be like 0.9, 0.95. So, so yeah. Anyway, what this does mean is that, yeah, if they lower the clock speed even a little bit, say from 1887 average to like 1600 average, it could translate to a pretty massive drop in a pretty good drop in voltage and a massive drop in overall power consumption, because the total power consumption is the combination of, of these two curves, right? Where, I'm not going to write out the full equation right here. It doesn't really matter that much. So still, the point is, basically though, I think just memory wise, there's no way they're going to go for a 512-bit memory controller, and they're probably just going to underclock the GPU, which is why it's so freaking big. Because the thing is, Navi 10 is just not very efficient. Like, it is very, very power hungry, right? Like 180 watts going into the core, for performance that, like, well, let's just look at it, right? Performance per watt. Like, a 2080 Ti is 8% more efficient per watt than a 5700 XT. And then you have something like a 1660 Ti, 6 gig, which just absolutely blows it out of the water. And that actually just tends to get worse as you increase because this is at 1080p. So here, some of these cards are actually getting like bottlenecked by the CPU. But if you look at 4K, a 2080 Ti has a pretty massive performance per watt lead. So AMD may very well be on, 7 nanometer, but their efficiency right now is kind of terrible. So yeah, I think most of this die size is going into just making it not pull 300 watts and then still being able to beat a 2080 Ti. Because here's the thing, if we look at the actual straight up performance summaries, right, over here, and we are going to look at the 4K one, because this is going to be like a 4K and 1440p, because at 1080p, the numbers get skewed a little bit by like something like a 2080 Ti can end up getting bottlenecked. So, at 1440p, the 2080 Ti is 146% of a 5700 XT, and a theoretical Navi 21 is supposed to be 200%, right? Twice as fast as a 5700 XT. So 200 divided by 146. That would be a GPU that's like 37% faster than a 2080 Ti, which is insane. Like that if AMD could actually pull that off, that would be incredible. But I really don't think that that's possible. Like N7 Plus from TSMC just doesn't seem a big enough improvement that AMD could both fit like an insanely fast core as well as a memory system big enough to feed that insanely fast core within a reasonable power budget. And if you can't do it within a reasonable power budget, then you basically can't do it at all. Otherwise, well, I don't. Well, it's not that you can't do it at all, but I don't think many people would be lining up to buy a card that pulls 400 watts or 450 watts, right? Like that's kind of the issue. Anyway, at 4K, the 2080 Ti leads, is 156% of a 5700 XT. So a theoretical Navi 21 would be 28% faster. Whereas my prediction, I'm just going to take that free memory bandwidth thing, because I really don't think the die size it's just a bad indicator. For all we know, the die size is maybe AMD is not even taking full advantage of the extra transistor density, right? Okay, the die's big. Doesn't really tell you how many transistors it's actually got. So choosing not going for the full transistor density could actually improve things like clock speeds or power consumption or things like that. Or they might be going for the full density and then just underclocking it like crazy. But anyway, the die size alone just not really that great indicator of much of anything. But anyway, if we go with whereas the memory bandwidth, it's just at some point it's going to get memory bandwidth limited. So I like that more as a performance metric, more as a performance indicator. Anyway, so a 171%, 171% of a 5700 XT, you'd be looking at this being faster by 10% than a 2080 Ti, which I think is a much more... that to me seems like something AMD might actually be intentionally aiming at, instead of something that's 28% faster. I'm not saying it's not I don't think 28% the thing is just yeah, well, there's not enough information, but I wouldn't get my hopes up is basically what I'm getting at. I really don't think that they're going to put a 512-bit memory controller onto their next GPU. Okay? Theoretically, that would at least be big enough to actually double the performance of a 5700 XT, but I don't think that's a practical memory configuration for any GPU right now. If it was an HBM chip, then I'd be okay, sure. I could totally see how you could... Well, I couldn't... I would still have a problem with the core power consumption, but the memory would be less of a factor into it, right? You can get more bandwidth out of HBM at lower power consumption than GDDR6. It costs more to do it, but it's actually doable. There is a way to get more bandwidth without, using up a bunch of PCBs, without having a ridiculous PCB design, and a really high power consumption memory system, and that's HBM. That's kind of the whole point of why it exists. But yeah, 10% faster than a 2080 Ti is because the thing is if it's 10% faster than a 2080 Ti for, let's say, 3 or 4 months, that's plenty of time for AMD to charge $1,000 for it. Right? And then NVIDIA will eventually probably, I'm assuming the plan is to try get this out before NVIDIA gets out their response to this. So it just needs to kind of beat a 2080 Ti for a bit, probably cost the same or maybe a little bit less. And, which again, if they want it to cost a little bit less, you really don't want a 512-bit memory controller because GDDR6 is expensive, right? And the die is going to be expensive as hell as well. So it's just and on one, well, I guess some people might be but you could do both and then AMD has sold GPUs that are really expensive to manufacture at lower cost than NVIDIA, but it's I think AMD doesn't want to keep, I don't think they want to keep running the GPU division as a charity, because that's what they've been kind of doing for a while now, especially with some of the cards where, you just had especially Vega. I think Vega 64 and Vega 56, like you were able to find them for like 250 to like 350 pounds new. And it's just like, yeah, that doesn't seem like something you'd want to be doing while in order to keep making profit. That just so yeah. Anyway, I think saying, you know, like twice as fast, I think is straight out like I I'm not going to say it's impossible because again, like there's a lot like that's a lot more transistors. So as long as they don't underclock the GPU by more than 20%, right? Which actually let's just do that. 1887 times 0.8. Oh, yeah. So as long as they don't underclock, like clock the GPU below 1500 megahertz, they should be fine. Now, at the same time, larger dies tend to be higher leakage and have larger problems with running higher clock speeds. So, and the higher leakage tends to be just because the die is like, you can't, like, it's less likely to be as perfect. You can't bin them as hard. So, yeah. I just find this really unlikely. Like, yeah. And then the memory system is just like, it would have to be huge. Like, absolutely freaking huge. So, to be twice as fast. So, yeah, I wouldn't get my hopes up. I mean, unless, you know, 10% faster than a 2080 Ti at the same price as a 2080 Ti sounds like something to get your hopes up over. I wouldn't get my hopes up because twice as fast just seems to me absolutely ridiculous. And also it is worth noting that historically, if you could look at some of the past GPUs that AMD has put out, like say a 290X compared to a 7970, if you look at them on paper, it looks like the 290X should be like way faster than a 7970 is. And then when you actually look at the performance, like the performance results, the 290X underperforms, relatively speaking. Like the 290X is like 6.2 billion transistors, but but if you took a 7970, like if you take the performance of a 7970 and just multiply, well, no, if you take the transistor count of a 7970 and multiply it by the performance difference between a 7970 and a 290X, you end up with something that's like 5.5 billion transistors, not 6.2. So there's like 700 million more transistors on a 290X than would be theoretically necessary for the performance that a 290X has. So yeah, here, like, so with this, it's like, yeah, this is a huge increase in transistor count, but who knows what kind of, you know, extras the card's going to offer. And ray tracing is definitely one of those things that it's going to be adding. Maybe more like maybe a more efficient memory controller, you know, or more efficient memory system, maybe more better. Like they could still actually going with the typical trend of AMD GPUs for the last several years, more tessellation hardware, you know, like, you know, stuff to just optimize tessellation performance again. Then some of that transistor count is potentially just going to be used to maintain clock speeds on such a large die. That's another thing that tends to chew up transistors. That's a very large chunk of why Vega has such a high transistor count, is because of the clock speed that it runs at. It's just like, yeah, there's a bunch of extra transistors just so that it can clock so high. So yeah, I would not get my hopes up. It does look like we'll finally have something from AMD that's going to be like a high performance GPU, as in like approaching, maybe beating 2080 Ti class, but I don't think it's going to blow a 2080 Ti out of the water. So yeah, because like, you know, well, yeah, if the power draw improvement was larger, then I'd be like, sure. But as it is, not really. So yeah, that's kind of that. That's my thoughts on the Navi 21 rumors from WCCF Tech. I think they're just being way too optimistic because double the die size does not translate to double the performance. It really, really doesn't. even though it is on like a, denser like manufacturing process, it's just like you still need a memory system, right? And 512 bits just, I don't think it's possible. Wonder if we can get to, yeah. Because the thing is, like, I'm just going to pull it up for the end of this video right now. If we go down back to like a 2080 Ti. Oh, they're like the thing is the as far as I know, the GPU vendors can't actually tweak the memory chip layout for NVIDIA GPUs anymore. NVIDIA has a lot of rules about how you can make their GPUs. So, yeah. Like this layout that you have is like, so this is a 384-bit, GDDR6 configuration. I'm pretty sure if you were doing a 512-bit configuration, you'd have to put the chips over here. You wouldn't be able to do what like the 290X does, right? Which a 290X just throws them, like, it basically just kind of throws the memory chips all over the place, right? Where you get this. So yeah, I'm pretty sure you can't do this on GDDR6. It just wouldn't work. So yeah, because if you could do this, then NVIDIA wouldn't have to have the core rotated by 90 degrees for their 2080 Ti. So yeah, I don't think we're going to see a memory configuration that looks like this, because there's just distance issues with it for GDDR6 as far as I'd assume there are like concerns with the distance to the memory chips. So yeah, that's the thing, is just like, we are going to get something that is going to, like, well, I hope it's going to be fast, because I do prefer my AMD GPUs to my NVIDIA GPUs. Like, I've not had an NVIDIA GPU in my daily system for since 2012. So, though I have to say the drivers have gotten steadily worse since like 2016. So I'm not impressed. Like, honestly, it's gotten to the point where it's like, I might just buy an NVIDIA 20 series for my daily system if I'm planning to upgrade a GPU, upgrade GPUs. But who knows? Maybe this will change my mind. Maybe Navi 21 will have drivers that don't make me consider NVIDIA. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be twice as fast as a 5700 XT. Like, mostly because you'd need twice as much memory bandwidth, and it's just like, where's that going to fit? So, yeah. Anyway, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching. If you think there's, if you... Bleh. Let's just do the outro the standard way. Stop trying to improvise. Like, share, subscribe. Leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comments section below. If you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon. There's a link to that down in the description below. And if you don't like Patreon and you'd instead like to buy, like, the usual YouTuber merch, like shirts, stickers, posters, that kind of thing, there is a link to the AHOC Teespring store down in the description below as well. Either of those options is great for supporting the channel. And yeah, that's it for the video. So thanks for watching, and goodbye.